In this video, I'm going to be looking at this Freewell ND filter set for the Insta360 ONE R with the 4K mod. What do they do, why do you need them, and how can you easily select which one to use? So let's get straight to it. The main purpose of an ND filter is to reduce the amount of light that enters the camera. You can then adjust the shutter speed, which allows you to create motion blur. The key is to create enough motion blur so your shot looks natural to the human eye. And when you're shooting video, you really want to go by the 180-degree rule, which means your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So over here in the UK, we shoot at 25 frames per second. So my shutter speed should be set at a 50th of a second in order to get what is perceived by the eye as natural motion. We want to create natural motion blur in the action that we see in our videos instead of a jaggedy, stuttery type image. And this is where ND filters come in, because they allow us to have more control over the shutter speed by reducing the amount of light that comes into the camera. So I use any excuse to get my nunchucks out, and this video clip gives you a really good example of the correct shutter speed and the incorrect shutter speed and how it affects the motion blur in the shot. So without the ND filter, to get the correct exposure so the shot looks the correct brightness, I'm using a 1250th shutter, and the action isn't how the human eye would naturally see it, and it's a bit stuttery. If I now use the ND filter, I can reduce the shutter speed to a 50th of a second, and this then introduces motion blur that the eye would perceive as natural, so the shot now looks more realistic. This set comes with 4 filters which are stored in a plastic case with a magnetic closure so it stays closed. Each filter sits on a fitted foam base, so all the filters are held in place securely. And in the set you have an ND4, an ND8, an ND16 and an ND32, and I'll talk in more detail about what they mean in a moment. The filters come fixed in a metal frame and they have a small rubber gasket which helps them fix securely over the 4K mod, and it prevents any damage to the camera's body. The filters also come with a filter guide and a lens cloth. The different numbers on the ND filters refer to the level of darkness that the filter creates, so the higher the number, the darker the image will be. The ND4 filter reduces the amount of light entering the camera by 2 stops. So on a camera iris, which is effectively the eye of the camera, when you close the iris by 1 stop, you're halving the amount of light that enters the camera. So if you reduce the amount of light by 2 stops, then you're halving the amount of light and then halving it again. The ND8 reduces the amount of light by 3 stops, the ND16 reduces the amount of light by 4 stops, and the ND32 reduces the amount of light by 5 stops. I was always told about the principle of KISS, an acronym which has a number of different variations, but the one I'm familiar with is Keep It Simple, Stupid. Now I'm not sure whether that was because people thought I was simple or stupid or both. And who cares? I know it works, so I want to keep this as simple as possible, so all you need to remember is the higher the number, the darker the filter and the darker the image. As a basic guide, you can use the ND4 for overcast, dull weather, and ND8 you could look at using in partial cloud, slightly overcast but a little bit brighter, and ND16 and ND32 you can use in normal bright sunny conditions. But you don't even need to remember that. The easiest way to know what filter to use is by following these simple steps. The first thing you need to do on the app is set your camera to manual settings. Now set your shutter speed to double your frame rate, so a 50th in the UK, elsewhere it may be a 60th. Put your ISO on 100 as this will give you the cleanest image. And now you simply hold the filter in front of the lens and see how it affects your shot. And using the rough guide that I've given you above, you don't have to go through every filter because you'll know roughly what filter to start with. So for this shot here, it was a bright sunny day, so I set the camera to manual, the ISO on 100 and the shutter to a 50th. The shot is clearly way too bright and everything is overexposed. I started with an ND16 because it was a sunny day, but you can see the clouds are still a little bit too bright. So I then put the ND32 on and the exposure now is perfect. So if the shot is too bright, then go for a darker filter, so a higher number, and if it's too dark, then go for a brighter filter, a lower number. In these shots I'm exposing for the clouds, which are the brightest thing in the shot. But if you had a person in shot, you'd be exposing for skin tone, so that would change your settings slightly. If you're filming shots of yourself, then you can stand in front of the camera and monitor what the shot looks like on the app. And then use the same process we've just talked about, so keep changing the filter until the shot looks exposed correctly. In some circumstances, if you can't find an exact match for the ND filter that you want to use, then you may have to tweak the shot slightly by maybe adjusting the ISO. So in this shot, if the ND64 filter was slightly too dark, then I could have raised the ISO to say 200 to make it brighter. But remember, we do want to keep the ISO as low as possible, because the more ISO we introduce into the image, then the more grain that we also introduce, so the more noise. And if the lighting changes while we're shooting, don't panic. We can make minor adjustments to the shutter speed to account for variations in lighting to make sure that our shot's exposed correctly. So if we need to change it to a 60th or an 80th, then that's absolutely fine. Remember, any small changes we make are a minor compromise compared to the shutter speed that we would have been on if we weren't using the ND filters. So start with the ideal optimum settings and try to maintain those settings with the ND filters. And if you can't, just get as close as possible. When you put the filter on, make sure you hold the edge of the frame and secure it in place by pushing the edges of the frame and not the middle of the filter. I found that when I took the filters off, I'd always leave big greasy prints all over the glass, but I think that's because I've just got big flat fingers. So just make sure that you always take the lens scarf that comes with the filters with you at all times. As long as you make sure that you keep these filters clean and you make sure there's no dust trapped in between the lens and the filter, these filters will help you get the best out of your Insta360 ONE R with the 4K mod, and they will enhance the quality of your action shots. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and drop a comment below on your thoughts on these ND filters and on the 4K mod in general. You can watch these two videos next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.